She wasn't supposed to be there. The wedding photo that exposed a vanishing bride. The beginning and the mysterious photograph emerges. Some photographs do more than simply freeze a moment in time. They act like fragile doorways, opening into hidden truths, buried secrets, and sometimes the kind of chilling reality no one ever imagined. What you're about to hear is entirely true, the story of a seemingly ordinary picture that changed everything, more than a century after it was taken. This is a journey of discovery, obsession, and the unsettling truth that had been hiding in silence for 100 years. It was an autumn morning in 2010. The golden sunlight stretched across the quiet streets of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, as Margaret Chen, a 3-4-year-old librarian with a deep passion for genealogy, carefully arranged old photographs on her late grandmother's dining table. She had just inherited the family's Victorian home, along with a treasure trove of keepsakes stacked high in the attic. Photographs, letters, documents, each meticulously preserved by her grandmother, Elalina Whitman, the family's unofficial historian. Among the many treasures, Margaret's eyes caught on a formal family portrait taken in 1910. The sepia-toned image showed 5 people standing in a stiff row in front of a grand Victorian house patriarch, Thomas Whitman, his wife Catherine, their 3 children, and a man Margaret assumed was either a family friend or a distant relative. The home behind them was stunning, a wraparound porch, ornate woodwork, and a perfectly manicured garden. Everything about it screamed prosperity, respectability, the perfect image of an early 20th century American family. At first, she set the photo aside and continued sorting, but as the day wore on and the afternoon light began to fade, she decided to examine it again, this time under the warm glow of the kitchen lamp. She reached for the old magnifying glass she had also inherited, slowly scanning the details, the fine stitching on her great-great-grandmother's dress, the tailored suits of the men, the pristine condition of the home. And then she saw it. In the upper right corner of the front window, there was a face. At first she thought it was just a reflection, but as she shifted the glass and tilted the photo in the light, the features sharpened. A young woman, pale, gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes, and an expression that stopped Margaret's breath cold. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't casual interest in the photograph being taken outside. It was fear. The obsession and the investigation begins. That night, Margaret couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. The haunting face in the window kept replaying in her mind, more vivid each time. She had studied countless historical images before, but never had she seen anything like this, a hidden figure that seemed to be silently screaming from the past. Over the next few days, her curiosity transformed into obsession. Margaret scanned the photograph at a high resolution, importing it into her computer. With painstaking care, she adjusted the contrast, brightened the shadowed areas, and zoomed in on the window again and again. Each edit brought the mystery into sharper focus. It was definitely a young woman, likely in her late teens or early 20s. Her face was pressed against the glass, as though trying desperately to get someone's attention. And her eyes, they carried the hollow look of someone on the edge of despair. Determined to understand who she was, Margaret dove into her family's past. She visited the local historical society, sifted through city directories, and combed old newspaper archives. She even reached out to elderly relatives, hoping for any scrap of information about the Whitman household in 1910. On the surface, the family history seemed impeccable. According to the records, Thomas Whitman was a prominent businessman who owned several properties in Cedar Rapids. He was known as a pillar of the community, active in politics, generous with charity, well-liked by other influential families. But beneath the polished surface, cracks began to show. In old newspaper clippings, Margaret found vague reports of domestic disturbances at the Whitman residence. No details, just whispers in print. Then, through her connections at the library, she gained access to hospital archives. What she discovered was unsettling. Between 1908 and 1912, several young women had been admitted to the local psychiatric institution, all with Thomas Whitman listed as the responsible party. They were described as household staff, suffering from hysteria or nervous disorders. And yet, there were no further records of these women after their admissions. Margaret's search was becoming something darker and far more personal. It was no longer just about the strange face in the window. She was beginning to suspect her own great-great-grandfather had been hiding a terrible secret behind the respectable facade. The letter and the terrifying connection. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. buried deep inside an old family Bible. Margaret had been carefully leafing through its yellowed pages when something slipped out: a folded letter, written in delicate cursive on fragile paper. The date at the top read 1911. It was addressed from her great-great-grandmother Catherine to her sister in Chicago. Margaret began to read. The words grew heavier with each line. Catherine wrote of her growing unease about her husband Thomas's behavior toward the household staff. She described hearing, crying, and sometimes screams from the servants' quarters late at night. Thomas, she said, had forbidden her from going to the third floor of the house. Thomas has changed, Catherine wrote in careful, deliberate strokes. He speaks of discipline and order, but I fear there is something darker at work. The girls who come to work for us arrive hopeful and leave broken, if they leave at all. I have asked him about Mary, the Irish girl who worked for us last spring, and he claims she returned to her family in Boston. But I found her belongings hidden in the cellar, Thomas. I found them, and I am afraid. Margaret's hands trembled as she lowered the letter. The name Mary echoed in her mind. Could it be? Could the pale, desperate face in the window be Mary, the Irish girl Catherine had tried to protect? Heart-pounding, she pulled the photograph toward her again, staring at the face as though seeing it for the first time. The fear in those eyes was no longer just a haunting mystery. It was a silent plea for help, frozen in time. If her suspicions were correct, then that century-old family portrait meant to project success and respectability had accidentally documented evidence of a crime that might have been far worse than she dared imagine. The forensic photographer's verdict. Margaret knew she needed an expert. The haunting image in the window was too vivid, too deliberate, to dismiss as chance. She reached out to Dr. James Morrison, a forensic photographer renowned for his work on historical image analysis. A thin, meticulous man in his 50s, Morrison had assisted law enforcement in solving numerous cold cases across the Midwest. When Margaret arrived at his downtown Cedar Rapids office on a gray November morning, she carried the original 1910 photograph sealed in an archival sleeve, as if it were a sacred artifact. Dr. Morrison examined the photo under varying light sources, switching between magnifiers, high-resolution scans, and specialized spectral imaging tools. He worked in silence for over an hour, his brow furrowed, occasionally jotting notes in a precise, almost clinical hand. Finally, he looked up. "This," he said, tapping the glass where the face appeared, "is absolutely human. The position of the features, the way the light strikes this, is no reflection, no photographic artifact." Margaret's stomach tightened. "She's deliberately placed there," Morrison continued, and in some form of distress. He pointed at her faintly visible hands pressed against the glass. "This isn't idle curiosity, it's someone trying to be seen." And here, he traced the outline of her mouth. "She appears to be calling out." The confirmation hit Margaret like a physical weight. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. It was professional verification, and now she had to know the truth, no matter how deep it was buried. Armed with Morrison's findings, she approached the Cedar Rapids Police Department. Her case landed on the desk of Detective Lisa Rodriguez, a cold case specialist. Initially skeptical, Rodriguez admitted her interest was piqued after seeing the enhanced image and Catherine's chilling letter. "We've had cases," Rodriguez told her, "where historical evidence has uncovered crimes no one knew existed. If there are victims here, they deserve to have their story told even after 100 years." The investigation was about to move from dusty archives into the physical world, the search beneath the ground. Detective Rodriguez wasted no time. If Margaret's suspicions were correct, the truth might still be hidden beneath the very ground where the Whitman home once stood. The original Victorian mansion had been demolished in the 1962, replaced by a modest apartment complex. The current owners, intrigued by the property's dark potential history, agreed to allow a non-invasive, ground-penetrating radar survey. On a frigid December morning, Margaret stood in the parking lot as technicians methodically moved radar equipment across the asphalt, mapping the earth below in careful grids. She hugged her coat tight, her breath hanging in the frosty air, each sweep of the equipment making her pulse quicken. Hours passed. Then, the lead technician approached Detective Rodriguez with a somber look. "We've found anomalies," he said. "Several of them." End quote. The readings showed 4 distinct disturbances in the soil consistent with unmarked graves. They were located in what would have been the backyard of the Whitman home, near the spot historical maps marked as the site of a small garden shed. The depth, size, and undisturbed condition of the anomalies all matched the timeline Margaret had pieced together. News of the discovery rippled quickly through Cedar Rapids. The local paper ran a headline that seemed almost surreal. Family photograph leads to discovery of century, old crime scene. For Margaret, the weight of what she had uncovered was staggering. She had begun this journey simply hoping to organize her grandmother's keepsakes, but now she was standing at the edge of something horrifying, something that, once uncovered, could never be hidden again. Excavation of the Forgotten Victims, January 2011. The cold bit deep into the Iowa soil, but the excavation moved forward with the precision of an archaeological dig. Leading the effort was Dr. Sarah Williams, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Iowa, her breath visible in the frigid air as she outlined the careful process to Margaret. "Bones preserve well here," Dr. Williams explained, her voice steady but solemn. "We'll be able to determine age, sex, and, if there's trauma, possibly the cause of death. Even after a century, artifacts, jewelry, buttons, personal items can tell us who these people were." Margaret visited the site daily, drawn by a sense of duty not just as a descendant, but as a witness. The first complete skeleton emerged slowly from the frozen earth. A young woman, likely in her late teens, buried in a simple dress fastened with brass buttons. Around her neck hung a small locket. Inside was a faded photograph of an elderly couple, perhaps her parents, whose eyes would never again meet hers. Dr. Williams' examination was grim. Multiple rib fractures, skull trauma. This wasn't an accident, it was prolonged, sustained violence. As days passed, 3 more bodies were unearthed. All were young women. All bore signs of severe physical abuse. All had been laid in shallow, hurriedly dug graves. Among the personal effects were letters in Irish, Gaelic, Italian, and Polish. When translated, they revealed heartbreaking narratives. Young women lured to America with promises of good work, only to find themselves trapped, punished, and silenced. One letter, written in Italian, was barely legible in the dim winter light. "I am writing this in secret. The man who promised work has become our jailer. We are not allowed to leave, and those who try are punished. If something happens to me, know that I tried to be brave." Margaret's thoughts kept circling back to the face in the window, Mary, the Irish girl her great-great-grandmother had spoken of in that letter from 1911. Now, it seemed, Mary's silent cry had survived for over a century, captured in the split-second blink of a camera shutter. The dark truth of Thomas Whitman. As the evidence mounted, the picture of Thomas Whitman, once painted as a model citizen, began to rot from within. Detective Rodriguez's investigation revealed a chilling pattern. Whitman had used his respected position in the community to prey on vulnerable young immigrant women. He targeted those newly arrived from Ireland, Italy, Poland girls with no family nearby, little English, and desperate for work. The method was calculated. Through immigrant networks, he offered positions as domestic staff with promises of good wages and safe lodging. But once inside the Whitman home, the reality shifted into nightmare. Wages never came. The women were not allowed to leave. Those who resisted or tried to escape were beaten, locked away, or worse. The abuse was systematic, and, as the graves in the backyard proved, it was deadly. Rodriguez suspected Whitman wasn't alone. Old records hinted at ties to other wealthy families in Cedar Rapids who might have been involved in similar exploitation. What she was uncovering wasn't just a family scandal, it was an early form of human trafficking, woven into the fabric of the city's history. At a press conference, Rodriguez spoke with measured anger. These women were lured with false promises, trapped in service, and ultimately silenced. The fact this remained hidden for over 100 years speaks to the vulnerability of immigrant communities at the time, and to how easily the powerful can hide their crimes. For Margaret, the revelation struck deeper than public outrage. She had to reconcile the fact that her own family's past was intertwined with these horrors. The name Whitman, once a source of heritage and pride, was now heavy with guilt. Yet, guilt alone wasn't enough. Margaret resolved to help return the victims to their rightful families, to give them the dignity they'd been denied in life. Identifying the victims, Margaret began reaching out to the descendant communities of Irish, Italian, and Polish immigrants in Cedar Rapids. She shared photographs of the recovered personal items, translated the letters, and asked for family histories of ancestors who had vanished after taking work in American households. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of families came forward with stories of great-aunts or cousins who had disappeared without explanation, their last known addresses placing them in Cedar Rapids around the time the Whitman home stood. Through painstaking genealogical research and DNA analysis, Dr. Williams and her team were able to identify 3 of the 4 victims. The first was Mary O'Brien, the Irish girl mentioned in Catherine Whitman's 1911 letter, and Margaret now believed the face in the window. Records from Ellis Island and DNA from living relatives in Ireland confirmed her identity. Her great-niece, Kathleen O'Brien Murphy, traveled from Dublin to attend Mary's reburial. With tears streaming down her face, Kathleen spoke at the memorial. For over a century, our family wondered what happened to Mary. We knew she went to America, but then her letters stopped coming. Now we know she never stopped thinking of home. She was trying to come back to us until the very end. The second victim was Sophia Rossetti, just 18 when she left southern Italy for a chance at a better life. The third, Anna Kowalski, a 20-year-old from a small village outside Kovno, was identified through Polish consular records and DNA from a distant cousin. The fourth victim remained unknown. With no matches to the DNA databases and no identifying artifacts, she was buried alongside the others in Cedar Rapids Oak Hill Cemetery, her headstone engraved simply, "Unknown Sister. She is not forgotten." The city donated the burial plot, and the 4 graves were marked side by side, a testament to lives cut short and a community's promise that their stories would endure. Legacy and reckoning. Margaret donated the original 1,910 photograph to the Cedar Rapids Historical Society. It became the centerpiece of an exhibition on immigration and exploitation in early 20th century Iowa, drawing visitors from around the world. Many came with their own stories of relatives who had vanished after arriving in America, of photographs that might now hold clues they had never considered before. The case rippled far beyond Cedar Rapids. Historians began uncovering other examples of domestic worker exploitation across the Midwest, recognizing patterns eerily similar to Whitman's. The story became a rallying point for discussions about historical justice and the unseen suffering of immigrant communities. Margaret eventually returned to her job at the library, but her life had permanently changed. She founded the Mary O'Brien Foundation, dedicated to genealogical research and the identification of victims in historical cases of immigrant exploitation. The foundation partnered with law enforcement, historical societies, and universities, developing protocols for investigating long-forgotten crimes. Every photograph tells a story, Margaret told the Cedar Rapids Gazette a year later. Sometimes that story is one of joy and family. Other times, it's a record of injustice that must be brought to light no matter how much time has passed. Dr. Williams continued her forensic work, but also began training police on recognizing potential evidence in historical archives. "Science gives us the tools to speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves," she said. "Every skeleton, every artifact, is an opportunity to restore dignity to a life cut short." Detective Rodriguez retired, but still spoke at conferences about the importance of cooperation between genealogists, historians, and law enforcement. "Justice doesn't have an expiration date," she told one audience. "When we recover victims and tell their stories, we honor them even if it's 100 years later." Margaret kept only one personal memento from her grandmother's attic, a silver locket that once belonged to Catherine Whitman. Inside, she placed a photograph of the 4 women restored to dignity in death, finally laid to rest. Outside the apartment complex that now stands where the Whitman house once loomed, a plaque was installed, in memory of Mary O'Brien, Sophia Rossetti, Anna Kowalski, and their unnamed sister victims of exploitation and violence. They are remembered and honored. Their stories will not be forgotten. Every year, on the anniversary of the discovery, Margaret brings flowers to that plaque, a silent promise to the women in the window and to all the others still hidden in the shadows of history.